Hello and welcome to Transfermarkt TV. I'm Manu Fed. He's Stefan Bienkowski. Stefan, today's topic is Pep Guardiola, and we're going to ask the essential question whether Pep Guardiola is on the path to become the greatest ever manager in the Champions League. Of course, this is on the back of Manchester City beating Bayern Munich to reach the semi-final where they're going to face Real Madrid, who are coached by Carlo Ancelotti, who is perhaps the greatest coach to ever coach in the Champions League. He's won the title 4 times. Pep has won it 2 times. When you go on our Transfermarkt page and you look at the winning in records, Pep Guardiola is right there in third place behind Sir Alex Ferguson and Carlo Ancelotti with a point per game average of 2.09. Stefan, 2 titles away from Ancelotti, that seems like a pretty tough task, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we all know how good Guardiola is a head coach. We all know how many league titles he's won in Spain, in Germany, and now in England. But I think
Mm,
it's probably fair to say that the one thing that's kind of been nagging at his legacy as,
yeah.
this kind of great reformer of modern European football is his lack of success in the Champions League. And I think, it's not surprising that, Manchester City are now back into another semi-final.
Mm,
And if they can get beyond Real Madrid, then obviously not only do Man City have the opportunity to reach or to win their first ever European trophy, but Guardiola has the opportunity to win his third, which would put him level with Bob Paisley and Zinedine Zidane, and one behind Carlo Ancelotti. And I think obviously the really interesting thing is that although Guardiola has now been going for some time now, I think this is his 15th season in the Champions League, actually.
mm,
He's still quite a young man. He's only 52. He's still got at least maybe another 10, 15 years of coaching at the highest level, should he, wish to coach into his later years. And it's not hard to foresee a situation where he does begin to start kind of picking up those Champions League trophies one after the other and potentially surpassing Carlo Ancelotti as the next, or the manager with the most Champions League / European Cups, because our records go all the way
mm,
back to I think 1954 maybe or 1956.
yeah.
So that's probably what Guardiola has in front of him, and I think there's probably a very good chance that he will be able to do that. You look at the fact that this Man City side are probably quite comfortably the best team in European football right now. They kind of showed that against
Mm,
Bayern Munich to a large extent. A team who were also tipped to kind of really go far in into this and
mm.
to go far in this competition. We're not writing Real Madrid off at all by any means.
We should
Obviously
never.
we should never. Real Madrid, especially under Ancelotti, have shown time and time again how comfortable they are as being the underdogs
Yeah,
and kind of upsetting the odds. And they've done that actually against Pep Guardiola quite recently as well. So
yeah.
by no means are we suggesting that Man City are going to kind of cakewalk to the final and pick up that trophy against Inter Milan or AC Milan. But I think it's really worth kind of looking at where Guardiola's in his career right now and saying, well, if he is able to kind of pick up his third this season, then it's not hard to envision over the next 5 or 6 years, considering Manchester City's financial dominance in the Premier League, which then translates
Mm,
quite well to European football. Remember, although they haven't won the Champions League yet, this is their third semi-final in a row now, which is
yeah.
really quite impressive for any club at European level. So they are beginning to kind of tighten their grip on this competition. And I don't think it's hard to foresee a situation in which, Guardiola is able to surpass Ancelotti's record. I do think there's one other coach who might be able to rival him in that, and that's, of course, Zinedine Zidane. He's obviously got one more than him because he picked up those three remarkable Champions League at Real Madrid. And I think it's quite interesting that he's been very picky about what his next move is, because I wouldn't be surprised if he's maybe kind of keeping one eye on this record too, thinking, well, whichever club I end up at next, I need to make sure I'm able to rival Guardiola in the Champions League each season.
I think the interesting thing here too is, right, not that many coaches that have won the competition with two different clubs. Pep Guardiola is, of course, still trying to get that record. Um, and I think too that has been, I mean, winning the Champions League with a team not named Barcelona has been sort of the holy grail for Pep Guardiola. We all remember the time at Bayern Munich where he maybe overthought it at the semi-final stage. Interestingly enough, against Real Madrid, right? Twice and then against Atletico. So facing this Real Madrid side, a little bit of a nemesis for him too. And this makes this game against Carlo Ancelotti even more interesting, I feel, because Carlo is such a legend of the game himself, right? In terms of how he manages to get the most out of a Real Madrid side, that every year we write them off, and every year they sort of get to this stage of the competition. And they got to this stage of the competition quite comfortably by beating Chelsea. I mean, how many people have joked that, oh yeah, Man City against Bayern Munich is going to be the greatest tie, and the loser gets to go out against Real Madrid. So I think that is still quite a strong possibility here, Stefan.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, I think it's quite interesting actually the way you watch the way that Manchester City played against Bayern Munich over the course of those two legs
Mm,
against Bayern Munich. Not only were they very careful, but they actually kind of they kind of actually resembled a bit Ancelotti's Real Madrid side in the sense that
yeah.
those days of Pep trying to overcomplicate things and trying to kind of control the game and kind of like a boa constrictor, just kind of like squeeze any kind of chance that our team had of holding onto the ball or possession, which almost always just kind of blew up in his face. You could write a book on the
Mm,
kind of many times that Guardiola has overthought things in Champions League at Manchester City and of course at Bayern Munich as well. He never won the Champions League there, and there's a few instances in key games where he picked some weird players or weird tactics. So the really
mm,
interesting thing this season is that he looks like he's just kind of made things very simple. That back four of basically four
mm,
central defenders. John Stones in there as well to kind of help things out in the middle of the park.
yeah.
And actually, for much of the tie against Bayern Munich, Man City looked like a defensive counter-attacking team, which is not
Hmm.
something we've ever really associated with Guardiola. And I thought it was quite interesting that you could draw comparisons to Ancelotti's Real Madrid, but actually you could also draw another comparison, which I'm sure Guardiola would be absolutely furious at, but you could maybe draw a comparison to Jose Mourinho in the sense the way that he's won the Champions League in the past. That Inter Milan team that, was such an amazing achievement that he achieved with the Italian side was largely built on defensive counter-attacking football. And by no means am I suggesting that Manchester City have been that defensive, but it's shades of grey compared to what Mourinho has done over the course of his career and his
Mm.
success as well. Remember, Mourinho's actually still won as many Champions League trophies as Guardiola, which is also
Yeah.
quite a remarkable comparison too.
And with two different teams.
Yes, exactly. So it's wonderful that football's like this in the sense that you can have these kind of these football coaches who for so long are adamant that you have to play football the right way, but then they maybe get to a certain
Yeah.
point in their lives and say, you know what, I actually really just want to win this thing now. So
Yeah.
if Guardiola's going to win it, like a Mourinho or an Ancelotti, so be it. That's his prerogative, but there's definitely
Mm.
perhaps a sense of irony in that as well.
I think you have to get rid of dogmatism and turn to pragmatism to win the Champions League. And I think Pep Guardiola, and I think this was the fascinating thing about this tie against Bayern Munich, because you're quite right. They handed Bayern Munich possession. They were very pragmatic in their approach to play Bayern Munich. They realized what Bayern Munich's weaknesses were and played to them rather than to their own strengths. And I think that is something that is very different than what we saw with Pep Guardiola at Bayern Munich, a time that is very well documented, and his time at Manchester City so far, where he always said like, no, we play a certain way. We're always going to play this way, no matter who the opponent is. We are Man City, and I feel like that's sort of going away a little bit, and I think that's going to make this tie against Real Madrid extremely intriguing. On top of everything that we've discussed, him going up against the most legendary coach in Champions League. I think Carlo Ancelotti just edges it for me over Sir Alex Ferguson. That's no disrespect to Sir Alex Ferguson, but Carlo Ancelotti is the guy with the cigar at the end of the season most of the time. So that is just a winner mentality. But yes, I think that wraps up this video, Stefan. You can find all the stats that we discussed on transfermarkt.com, transfermarkt.co.uk, or transfermarkt.us. Check out the Champions League schedule that's up on Transfermarkt as well, and everything else you need about the competition. Need to know about the competition. We got you covered top to bottom. Until next time, cheers and bye bye.